really honored to get the chance to talk to you, being part of Jim Henson's legacy, being able to perform not just a character on Sesame Street, a very revolutionary and important character on Sesame Street on the week of his birthday. And before we get into some of those things, I mean, I've had a chance in the show to talk about what Jim meant to me, how even as an adult in my 40s, I still fondly look back and can still laugh and appreciate so much that I got from not only the Muppets, but definitely Sesame Street. I have to assume, considering that you found an early passion for puppetry very early in your life and well into college, I have to think there's some of that, of Jim's magic had an impact on you as well growing up.
Oh, yeah, 100%. When I was, probably 12 or 13 years old, my brother walked in the room and caught me watching Sesame Street, and I quickly changed the channel. And he was like, "It's fine, put it back on. I know you were watching it. Don't worry." and it's because I was watching it for the puppetry. I mean, it was just so fascinating to me and still hilarious.
Yeah.
You know, at 12 and 13, even as an adult, I find especially those earlier sketches are just a hoot, you know, just seeing the amount of fun that they were having. It is so apparent on screen that they adored each other and that they had fun with each other. And I think that's probably what drew me to it.
Yeah, I will tell you that my wife's walked in the room and caught me watching Sesame Street and said the same thing. It doesn't really surprise her. You know, HBO Max made some of those old episodes available, and I've watched a few of those just to remember those things. But one of the things that, like you said, that I love watching is going back and watching some of those early sketches because, you know, one of the amazing things that Sesame Street especially has been able to do over the years is that aspect of entertaining and educating, but they can do it for audiences of all ages. I mean, there were things that I found that obviously I was engaged in as a kid, and then when it came to some of that humor and some of those really funny things that you talked about that you're laughing at even as an adult, I mean, to me, that's what's so incredibly genius about the whole concept and how long it's lasted over the years, is the ability for those characters to be able to entertain everybody at different levels while it's still running the same skit that everybody's watching.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that was part of the brilliance of Joan Gans Cooney, too, was to make sure that parents enjoyed what they were watching with their kids, and, you know, really discovering that kids learn more when the parents are engaged with it as well. Some of the Muppet Show things, the things that they were doing with late night television, things like that, I mean, you couldn't find a better person than Jim Henson to draw in the adult audience. And I can remember when I got to see the pilot episode or the pitch episode for the Muppet Show, and he's talking about, you know, kids will love it, hippies will love it, adults will love it. You know, he's just naming all of the things. Yeah, and it's a riot. There's such an honesty and self-deprecation about it too that is just really delightful.
Yeah.
Not self-deprecation so much. Well, sometimes even in the early Muppet stuff. Not that we would want preschoolers to watch so much self-deprecation right now, but
Right.
You know, back then it was a little bit more loose. We didn't quite understand as much about early childhood education as we do now. Even bringing that into today when they do the parodies, Orange is the New Snack. And, you know, that's obviously draws from Monster Piece Theater back in the day. Yeah. With Alistair Cookie.
Yes, Alistair Cookie. I remember that too. Yeah, sitting there with his, I think, pipe and
his smoking jacket.
In the smoking jacket,
Yeah. in the big armchair, and it's just a riot. Yeah, and then the sketches. I always think of the one with Bert. The Bert and Ernie sketches had me.
Absolutely.
Bert and Ernie in a boat, and Ernie going here, fishy, 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 fishy. And just the duo of them, just the friendship and the closeness of those two characters, and you can really tell the relationship between Jim and Frank.
Yes.
And obviously, didn't know Jim, and I don't know Frank, but I think we all have a friend that we love so dearly.
Yep.
I mean, I have a best friend who's just like that. We take turns being the goofball and being the straight man. It is endearing and delightful to see that played out with lovable characters that we've known since our childhood.
Yeah, in fact, when I was watching some of those old episodes on HBO Max, Bert and Ernie sketches were the first things I started to look for. And I'm one of these people that my wife will tell you, she often talks about how all the creative ways I can work scenes and lines from movies just by her saying something else.
Oh, yes.
Bert and Ernie sketches are included in those. There's a sketch where Bert gets angry because Ernie starts to try to rhyme everything that Bert says. He goes, "Ernie, please, I want you to stop." And he goes, "Some people like to jump and hop." So.
Oh my gosh, I remember that.
Yeah.
Wow, I hadn't thought about that one in years.
Yeah, so if somebody says, "Please, I want you to stop," I'll go, "Some people like to jump and hop."
Oh, that is great.
You decided early on that this was something you wanted to pursue. Can you talk a little bit about your journey through puppetry before Sesame Street? I always wonder what it's like to have somebody see something in action and go, "Yeah, I want to do that." And then kind of what they learn along the way that might have been harder or maybe unexpected that they weren't expecting, just, based on watching other people do it.
Well, what was unexpectedly difficult? Everything. Every single thing. I knew that I wanted to play with puppets. I knew that I wanted to play when I was an adult. Mm-hmm. When I was a kid, I knew that when I became an adult, I wanted to play. And I first went about that just by, I started puppeteering when I was a teenager. And, I got my first puppet when I was, before I could even talk. I always had, puppets on my hands, or I was moving dolls around, like they were puppets. I was putting Barbie shoes on my feet and seeing how realistically I could walk across the kitchen counter in them. I was just fascinated with tiny things moving, or any fake food. That was my other passion, was anything fake food, especially food with eyeballs. Anthropomorphize anything, and I am in.
Awesome. Well, they did that too. The Muppets did that a lot.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm sure that was one of the reasons that I loved it so, so much. But I started puppeteering when I was in high school with my church. I have a picture of me at church as I was 5 years old, and there was a visiting puppeteering group, puppeteering and clowning. And I'm 5 years old, and they let me try a puppet on my hand. And we've got an old Polaroid of that with me with a puppet on my hand. And then my high school church group was going to go to Mexico on, we're going to go build houses in Mexico, like a service trip. And somebody said, "Well, there's a bunch of kids there. What are we going to do to entertain the kids?" And I said, "Let's bring puppets." And somebody said, "Well, who's going to make the puppets?" And I said, "My mom will make the puppets." Just completely volunteering. So my mom had me help her. She was of the idea of, you volunteer your friends, you volunteer yourself.
Okay.
So she and I made a set of 5 puppets, and this is in the 90s, before there was an internet, before, you'd go to the fabric store and you'd look for a puppet pattern. Well, there wasn't such a thing.
Yeah.
So we just had to kind of figure it out. And we made these puppets that were ginormous. We put toddler clothes on them. They were so big. And I brought them to Mexico, and, we rehearsed with them. We performed to tapes that were in Spanish. And I just had an amazing time. And you could really see the power of using puppetry to reach people, whether it was for, just brightening their day or getting a message across or anything. It was just really powerful. And I went to college, did more puppetry there, did a lot of theater. And I thought, well, the thing that I can do that is a sensible career is early childhood education. Mm-hmm. And I can do puppetry in early childhood education. Mm-hmm. Well, I went on the college program at Disney World, which, if you're not familiar with it, it is inexpensive labor for Disney World, but you get college credit for it.
Yeah.
And you take a few classes during the day, and then you go and you work at the parks. Mm-hmm. We got to do some shadowing And I saw immediately that you could shadow puppeteers. And I was like, that's what I want to do.
Mm-hmm.
I want to shadow puppetry. And so they let me shadow the Little Mermaid
I was wondering.
Stage show.
Yeah, I was wondering if Little Mermaid was where you went.
The Little Mermaid is where I went. And really what that consisted was me standing wearing all black clothing, black gloves, black everything, head to toe, standing in the middle of the stage and observing the puppeteers as they were performing. So I got to quote unquote be involved in like 3 to 5 performances throughout the day. And then I got to talk with the puppeteers, and they trained me in a little bit of the puppetry there. And this was, again, mid-90s, and it was just absolutely wonderful.
Yeah.
I decided that when I went back to school, I was not going to finish my degree in education because I needed to do theater. I found what excited me. I got married, we moved to Arizona, and I got hooked up with the Great Arizona Puppet Theater here in Phoenix. They've been around for 30, 35 years. And I started doing their series of adult shows. They're called Puppet Slams. And they happen all around the country. And they're wonderful, wonderful places for people to get their start in puppetry. Story is kind of key there, so you don't have to be the best puppeteer in the world.
Okay.
And then eventually I got hired by the Puppet Theater and started doing shows for them. Started going to things called puppet festivals, which is like a conference almost. It's like professional development where you go and you take classes during the day and then you watch performances in the evening. And my goodness. And by the way, my very first puppet festival was in 2007 in Minneapolis, and I got to meet Martin P. Robinson, who plays Telly Monster and Snuffleupagus. And
nice.
I got my picture taken with Telly at the Puppet Festival, and I was just over the moon to actually meet a real puppeteer.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I take that back. Not a real puppeteer, a real Muppeteer.
Yes.
I'd met plenty of
Muppet
real
performer.
puppeteers at that point. I was a real puppeteer. Yeah. A real Muppet performer. He was just so nice. And his wife was with him, and, I got to ask her some questions, and she was writing for the show. And I was fascinated by the whole thing, but I did not view working on Sesame Street as something that was attainable for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny you talk about meeting the guy that did Snuffleupagus and Telly. You should have seen me last year. My wife talks about this all the time. I had a blast just going to SeaWorld and having my picture with Telly at Sesame Place Park.
Sesame Place.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, no.
That was a big deal to me. It wasn't the real guy, but I don't care. I was like, I'm getting my picture with Telly and Bert and Ernie and Oscar.
Yeah. Well, and you know what's funny is when I was at Disney World, I was part of the character department. So I was in those walkarounds, and man, every now and again, I have a dream where I'm doing it again, and I wake up and I'm disappointed that I'm not in the job that I had when I was in college. It was so much fun. You got to get and give hugs all day long and make people's day. So I decided I was just going to do my own thing. I was doing all these shows. I was working in the puppet theater. Eventually, I have a child, and eventually my schedule and I think the economic downturn, the puppet theater had to cut back my hours. And so I just kind of started doing my own thing. I was building a lot of puppets for people, still performing in slams. I was kind of traveling around and doing puppet slams. I'd go to LA and stuff. And then I'd go to Dragon Con and a lot of different conventions. I am a nerd, and I go to conventions. There's 3 main ones a year.
Awesome.
I go to the Phoenix Comic Convention, which is now called Phoenix Fan Fusion.
Yep.
I go to Gen Con, which is a board game convention. I'm a big board game nerd. And then I go to Dragon Con. There's a really great puppetry track at Dragon Con that is just like a family reunion every time I go. And you go to these things and puppet festivals, and you meet a lot of really great people. I eventually met all kinds of people who performed for the Muppets, and, everyone is really down to earth, and you just become friends. Well, they still are the people you idolize, because
right. No, I
how
get
can
you.
you not? But you get to know them on a different level. And let's see, I got to perform with Tyler Bunch and Victor Yared and Leslie Carrara Rudolph and Pam Arciero. And, they're just such wonderful people to be around. And then when you go home, you're like, oh, I did this awesome thing. And it just spurs you on to more creativity. So, I had no aspirations to be part of the Muppets, part of Sesame Street. I ended up getting my own art studio. I was teaching a lot, doing library programming, going into schools, things like that, just doing my own thing. And then I got an email out of the blue that Pam and Leslie had recommended me for a role. They didn't know me, so they asked me to send quite a few tapes. And next thing I know, I'm in New York and I'm auditioning. And then the next thing I know, I'm on the phone with Matt Vogel, and they've said that they've chosen me.
Wow.
Which they were specifically looking for a puppeteer with a strong connection to autism. Prior to having my son, who is verbal autistic,
Yep.
I was a habilitator,
Right.
which is a paraprofessional for a little girl who is nonverbal autistic.
Yeah.
Actually, well, I say nonverbal, I should say semi-verbal. She's very much like Julia.
Okay.
Very, very much like Julia. In fact, Sesame Street decides, the character in terms of how verbal will she be, what can she do, what can't she do, which is exactly, I feel like they hit the nail on the head, because they can't represent every child.
Yeah, and that was something I wondered about, just because there's so much there, and there's so many variations of it. Like my wife's brother is autistic, and so we have a strong connection to it all too. I mean, and I've watched him grow up over the last 20 years, and I've seen what his parents have to do every day, but I also see some of the amazing and incredible things that he pulls off on a regular basis. We're always getting videos of performing and music and all that kind of thing. And, we think about him sometimes when we're watching Cody Lee on America's Got Talent and the amazing thing that kid does. So, and I've seen, I did after school care when I was in college. That was like my side job. So I would go and work with kids. And we had a couple of kids with autism there as well, who are a little different from my brother. So that was definitely, or from Jen's brother. So that was definitely something I wondered about. That had to be a real challenge, not only bringing this character who was originally in Sesame Street books, bringing something that was in a book to life, but also deciding, okay, well, of all the different aspects of the spectrum, how do we infuse that in a way that's going to work best for what we're trying to do here?
Right. Well, and the Sesame Street, they consulted with over 80 autism organizations. They really wanted to get this right, and they had to get it right.
Yeah,
and it's not just that they want to help the greater community, And when I say greater community, I mean the rest of the world. I don't just mean the autistic community. Their family. Yeah. The Sesame Street family has autism represented in it. It's meaningful to so many people who work there. And, just represented in the people who work there, autism looks different for everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my son was extremely verbal and then lost some communication skills and then got them back. So his autism definitely looks different than Bethany's, where Bethany had quite a few phrases, and not quite a few. I would say Bethany had probably about 10 to 20 phrases that she was really good at. And when I say good at, I mean she used those communication skills well to communicate her needs. Mm-hmm. She had other communication skills that she used that are 100% valid. I guess that's what I want to get across, is that being verbal isn't the be-all and end-all of communication.
Right.
And with Bethany, we used some sign language. We used what were called a PACS, is picture-assisted communication. And then we used, she would take me by the hand and lead me. She had some phrases that she used that we worked on. But she was and is ultimately able to communicate what she needs to through a variety of ways. I had a young man in one of my puppeteering workshops that came in with nonverbal. Mm-hmm. And when it was time to say things, he would type it into his phone and hand it to me and ask me to read it for him. These are perfectly valid ways of communicating. And so when I say that my son is verbal, that's his way of communicating. He also has other ways of communicating, as we all do.
Yeah.
But when I say verbal or nonverbal, I want people who don't understand the autistic community to understand that just because someone isn't verbal doesn't mean they're non-communicative.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that they're not any less of a person. They are 100% valid.
And I know there's
exactly the way they are.
Yeah, and I know there's representation in that from your own experiences, and also how everyone decided to approach Julia too. Because I saw an interview that you had where you talked about taking your son to, it was a swimming class with other kids, and how kind of uneasy that was, because it was clear the adults were kind of staying away and the kids were kind of staying away. And part of what you were saying at that point in time was, it's not so much that he doesn't want to be involved, it's he doesn't know how to ask and get involved the way everybody else does. Yeah. And then you have that first episode on Sesame Street where Julia is painting a picture with some other people, and Big Bird comes over and says, hey, let me look at this. Hey, look at this. And everybody's like, yeah, check this out. And then when he talks to Julia doesn't respond immediately, hardly at all, because she's so laser focused on what she's doing. And that is the moment where you're able to explain, look, it's not that she doesn't want to share what she's got. It's just this is communicating a little different. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Man, taking me back to that swim class. It stirs up a lot of emotion.
I'm sure it does.
Because I remember feeling isolated as a parent.
Yeah.
And I sat there thinking about how much more isolated my child felt because kids weren't talking to him. Kids weren't saying, "Do you want to go out to ice cream?" They were saying it to each other.
Right.
But not to him. One of the reasons that I was grateful to be a puppeteer was that it allowed me to be flexible in my schedule. I ended up working at his school in the after-school program so that I could help facilitate a little bit better his social interactions.
Okay.
We were really, really lucky. We sent him to a wonderful Waldorf school.
Okay.
Where they allow each child to be themselves. They're not pulled and put in a program. They're not separated from other kids. They're not labeled disruptive. Mm-hmm. They're not labeled withdrawn. I can remember, this is before I worked there, mm-hmm. I can remember picking him up. I remember picking him up after school, and one of his preschool teachers she was pre-K, and then she'd work in the after-school program as well. She came up to me, and she said, "Hey, I want you to know that your son chased a group of children with a palm frond today. We have a lot of palm trees."
Yeah.
And I immediately thought, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, because our experiences at other preschools were such that if he had chased anyone, he would be in trouble. And I said, oh gosh, I'm so sorry. She said, no. We were so delighted to see him engaged and taking a leadership role. Mm. And I just thought, wow, he's in the right place.
Yeah, no kidding.
These people see him for the great kid that I see him as. And at that time, I'd been asking our pediatrician, hey, do you think he might be on the spectrum? And she said, no, I don't think so. I don't think so. And a lot of people had told me that I was looking for it because,
Yeah.
I'd been working in the not in the field, but in the community.
Yeah.
So he didn't get diagnosed until he was 7. When he was 6, I had a 6-year pediatric appointment. I asked again. I said, these are the things that I'm seeing, and I kind of laundry listed them. And she said, you know what? Let's get him in with a specialist. It took us over a year to get in with a specialist because there are so few of them for the number of kids that need to be seen.
Yeah.
And that's one reason that the average age of diagnosis is so high.
Yeah.
And one reason that it's so important that parents and teachers and pediatricians see Julia. It's so important that there is representation, that autism is in, the public mind.
Yeah.
And one reason that it's so great that there's these billboards, and they say something to the effect of, I'm not going to get it totally right, but when you view your child's world through her lens, you will unlock a world of possibilities.
Yeah.
Because regardless of diagnosis, regardless of anything, that statement is true.
Yeah.
When I had my child in like a typical preschool classroom, and he got in trouble for crying because the room was too loud, or he didn't respond to his name, so he was put into timeout. I mean, Julia didn't respond to her name.
Right.
My son didn't respond to his name. That's a common thing, I found out.
Mm-hmm.
And he was punished for it. And we brought him to a school that attempted to see everything from a child's perspective, and it did unlock a world of possibilities. But then further, getting that diagnosis unlocked that world even further. We were able to get him into therapy. Mm-hmm. We were able to get him services at school, and he stopped hiding under the desk and pulling his hair. And now he's at a school for kids with learning differences. Everyone at his school has experience with autism. He's with kids who understand his world. He went from having probably, 7 to 10 meltdowns a week, even as an 8th grader, to having 1 or 2 meltdowns per semester.
Wow. What a difference that makes.
School. Yeah. Oh my gosh. And as grateful as we were for the chartered Waldorf school, this school specifically for kids with learning differences, and just seeing how his world was catered to, and not necessarily catered to in a spoiled child way, but catered to in that we need to accommodate everyone in this world.
Right.
We need to increase access to subtitles, to sign language, to everything, to picture-assisted communication. We need to normalize these things because they are normal. We just don't see them every day because we've somehow been taught that we shouldn't talk about them, which is one reason I'm so, so, so grateful Julia exists. And then just floored and humbled and honored that I get to participate in this.
Do you remember what it was like to walk on that set as Julia for the first day?
Terrifying.
Exciting and terrifying?
Absolutely. Exciting for sure, but terrifying because there were 2 communities that I did not want to let down.
Yeah.
I didn't want to let down my puppeteering community. I had what I felt was a lot of monitor experience. But next to, Eric Jacobson, Leslie Carrara, Rudolph, Ryan, Dylan, all these people, I had, none. And I was self-taught. And so I had all this experience, but it was wrong experience.
Well, it just meant you took it to a new level. That's what it meant. I mean, the moment you're on the set, it was already a new level.
Oh yeah, I leveled up for sure. But more importantly, I didn't want to let down my autism community. And that's who I didn't want to let down my son. I didn't want to let down any of my autistic friends. I didn't want to let down the research department at Sesame Street, like Rosemary and Rocio. I didn't want to let down anyone who hired me. But most importantly, I didn't want to let down any actually autistic people.
Well, and I think that's one of the reasons why I think it's so great to be able to talk to you now, is because I guess, Julia has now been out for a handful of years, a few years, and there have been some pretty tremendous stories of the feedback and responses you have gotten. When we go back and think about what we were just discussing about an opportunity, especially early in our discussion when we were talking about the ability to have characters on Sesame Street have that ability to get a message across to kids and adults alike, especially if you're watching those shows with your children. I mean, the importance of learning how to interact with someone like Julia is not only important to the other kids around, but the adults are there learning too, the other people the humans that live on Sesame Street, especially when you're trying to get some of those messages across where other parents or maybe you in the future aren't dealing with some of those things like at the swim class or anywhere else. Have you had a chance to hear from people who have experienced some of the advantages of having this character on Sesame Street, or have you in your own life seen some differences that may or may not even be related to that, but clearly you can connect them somehow?
Right. Just you asking that question and me thinking about the response literally gives me goosebumps, all over my body goosebumps, because I hear from people on a regular basis. Whether or not I'm able to respond is another thing. But I hear from people on a regular basis, and it is so intensely impactful. And the one that I related to the most was a person on Twitter named Ship, and they had their son. They call him Action Kid online.
Yes.
They had their son at a swim class, and they overhear a little girl saying, "I want to go play with him," and the grandmother, or the assumed grandmother, saying, "Okay, but be careful," because it was clear with him flapping his hands and spinning in a circle, which I definitely remember my son doing. The grandmother says, "Be careful," and the little girl responds, "Oh, I know. I saw on Sesame Street."
Wow.
And I'm literally choking up with tears, because I wish that had been my son's experience. When I was working in his kindergarten classroom, I'd have kids come up to me and ask me why he was different. And I'd say, well, we're all different. All of our brains work differently. All of us have different abilities and different skills. And
very true.
We're all different. There's the saying, if you've met one kid with autism, you've met one kid with autism. And it's true. And if you've met one person, you've met one person.
That's right.
We all have our similarities, and we all have our differences. And how anxiety manifests in me is very similar. It's almost identical to how it manifested in my son when he was younger.
Yeah.
And this is where, I have some autistic traits, not enough to be labeled autistic by any, not enough. I cannot claim that at all. But I have sensory processing challenges. I have days where my husband will come in and just touch my back as like he's going to, rub my back, and I'm like, I recoil and shit.
Yeah.
And then I have days where I'm okay. I have days where I can eat shrimp, and I have days where, the smell of bubble gum makes me want to puke.
Yeah.
It's a sensory processing thing. There's certain smells and textures I can never handle. Bubble gum is actually one of them. But
fair. Yeah.
It's sticky. sticky things, absolutely not. I see people finger painting, and I'm like, you guys are insane.
But you go ahead. I'll stand over here.
Yeah, you got, and so I can draw from that.
Yeah.
When they said that Julia doesn't like finger painting, I'm like, I am on board with that.
Yeah, you don't have to convince me. No creative differences there.
When they said that she wants to eat bananas with a fork, I am like, why does she even want to eat bananas? I don't understand.
I think I might be in that boat too. My wife wouldn't, but I would.
Right. There's different things. Like, we did the Julia's haircut episode, and man, I have to say, quarantine made me understand that even more than I typically would have.
Yeah.
I have bangs. And I do not like them when they hit my eyes, but when they got to a point where it was beyond where I would even go, like, usually it gets to a point where they drive me insane. I have to go get a haircut. And then quarantine happened, and it was like, okay, maybe I just don't have bangs anymore.
I was in the similar boat. I didn't have the bangs thing, but it got so long that when I finally did get a haircut, I said, I think I told him to do like the second to the last deepest cut they could do, just so it meant I didn't have to go back for a while.
Like two guards.
Yeah.
It off. Yeah. Almost there. But I mean, like, I can draw on my generalized anxiety disorder. I can draw on all of those things, because I've seen my son literally pulling his hair underneath a table because he had to write a sentence, and writing is, writing or cursive or anything is not his strength.
Yeah.
And I just know what that feels like, to be so overwhelmed that you literally cannot speak. I know what that's like. I've been at the point where I've had to type my words out because I can't say them, where I've had to text my husband because I'm in such a panic attack that I can't speak. So drawing on those personal experiences, but also, having friends who are actually autistic, having my son, who, especially as he's been older and able to articulate what these experiences are like, really using that to help bring authenticity to Julia.
Yeah, and we've had a chance to talk about some of the struggles and some of the challenges, and and I've mentioned that my wife's brother Zach has obviously had challenges or two. He's not very verbal or high functioning, but there's a lot of things he can do, and the things he can do is pretty freaking awesome. It's stuff I cannot do even with training. So and I know that you also have enjoyed the opportunities that you've had, and I definitely want to throw this out there, where you've been able to talk about your sons. I think you've referred to him appropriately as superpowers.
Yes.
I would love to hear some of the things he can do.
So when he was in kindergarten, in the after-school program, there were many age groups, and there was a third grader. Mm-hmm. And he loved her so much. He did not often interact with his peers. He would go to older kids or much younger kids.
Okay.
So when he was in kindergarten, he interacted with this third grader who was just awesome and taught him the times tables. She said, "Here's how you figure it out." And she was filling out times tables, and then he was like, "Can I do that?" And so in third grade, or I'm sorry, not third grade, in kindergarten, he's filling out times tables. Now, he did not know his numbers at the time. He knew how to count, but he didn't know what they all looked like.
Yeah.
And his fine motor skills were not at a point where he could write them accurately. But there were these symbols that were all consistent with one another. And so you'd ask him, well, hey, what is that number? And he'd tell you, oh, that's a 3. Oh, that's a 5. Or, what is this number? Oh, it's, 35, whatever. And he filled this out, and it was right. He is so mathematical. And playing into that, he is so musical. He would sit down at a piano and improvise, lullabies and marches and just make beautiful, beautiful music. And a lot of the times he did it to cope with his emotions. Yeah, it was something that he could turn to. Math, too, something that he could turn to, because math is consistent. People are inconsistent, but math That is always
That's
consistent.
true. That's a good way to look at it, because you want to talk about something that causes me anxiety. It's math. That's what causes
yeah, right? Me too. Me too. My child decided to take or to watch online astrophysics courses from universities that had been made free online over the summer. He wants to be an astrophysicist. He wants to go to MIT.
Nice.
And he's been saying that he wanted to go to MIT since he was in kindergarten. And we saw it was a documentary called Fast, Cheap, and Out of Control. It was a fantastic documentary. I highly recommend it.
Okay.
It's on Amazon Prime. You have to rent it, but
okay.
it is on Amazon Prime. Just a few dollars. It's about an expert on the naked mole rat, a lion tamer, a topiary creator, and a robotics engineer from MIT.
Okay. Walk into a bar.
And how are these right? No, exactly. But it ties all of them together in a very beautiful way.
That's cool.
It's just a beautiful documentary. But he saw that, and he saw the robotics engineers, and he said, I want to go to MIT. I want to go to MIT. And so his whole plan, even though his interest went from engineering to astrophysics or astronomy / astrophysics, he still had MIT in his sights. Now that he'll be 17, now that he's, a junior in high school, he's like, well, maybe I'll apply to MIT, but maybe it's not the first place I go. So he's doing a little. Do you know what the Marshmallow Test is?
The Marshmallow Test.
So it was a study, or the Marshmallow Study per se is what it should be called. So there was I forget who did the research, but there were scientists that gave children a marshmallow, and they said, if I come back in 10 minutes or whatever length of time, and you have not eaten this marshmallow, it was a test in self-control.
Yes.
You've not eaten this marshmallow, we'll give you a second marshmallow and you can have it. So I thought it would be fun to do this with my child at around that age. He was 5. And I gave him the marshmallow, and I was like, I'm not gonna walk, or I'll hand it to him. And I gave him the rules, and I said, if you want, if you can wait 10 minutes, I'll give you another marshmallow. And he said, you know what? I think I'm just going to eat this marshmallow right now, because if I have two marshmallows, that's too much sugar.
Perfect.
So he wasn't just thinking about the next 10 minutes. He was thinking about the next 30 years.
He had the weight of everything under consideration.
This is one of his gifts. Awesome. I will say it is both a gift and a curse, because it can cause him quite a bit of anxiety, but he really hones it in to, seeing that he wants to play the long game, and he wants to, do the things that's going to get him into college, that's going to set him up to be a successful adult. Yeah, I will say that is one of his gifts.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And Bethany had gifts too, or she still has gifts. I mean, this child, I say child, she's an adult now.
Yeah.
You know how when you don't see someone for a long time, even though you see them when they're grown up or a teenager, et cetera, you still, because they were kids when you met them, they're still that little kid. My son will always be an infant in my arms.
Yes.
So Bethany will always be a 3 to 5-year-old in my mind, just because I'm just like, if she grows up too much, then I get older, right? So, but I mean, her laugh is Julia's laugh.
Oh, really?
Her bright spirit and Julia's lightness are one and the same. That's who I modeled Julia off of in that part of her personality. Just that light, bouncy, ethereal. Yeah, Bethany's just a beautiful, beautiful young woman who will study your face and take you all in, and then she surprises you.
I
and I shouldn't be surprised.
Yeah. I think about what it must be like for you now to not only be able to look back on all this, but also look at what's possible in the future, build on what you've already accomplished, both as a mom and as a performer with Sesame Street, being able to create and bring somebody like Julia to life. I mean, I think about how, when Jim decided to make Kermit, Kermit was made from his mother's coat. And he was supposedly, a frog. And, you were talking about making these puppets at an early age. And now, that coat is like world famous and has had an impact on so many people's lives in so many different ways we can't even count or even know. And I have to think that looking back on all this now, to think that you've been able to be part of that tradition with Julia, to have this character be able to, entertain and teach and help people understand, and then be able to walk out in the real world and see it for yourself. I have to think that it's incredible to look back on that, but so much to be excited about being able to carry that legacy forward for as long as you continue to do this.
Yeah, it's surreal. It is incredibly surreal, because when I'm at home, I was going to say I don't have Julia with me, but now I do because of the pandemic. But
right.
Only because of the pandemic.
She's staying with you.
But, yeah, she's just staying for. But yeah, I have the puppet. So typically when I'm at home, I'm back to doing my own thing, and I'm laser focused on my small business and all of that. It's only when I go to New York, so it feels somewhat compartmentalized. There's days when I think about it, and days when there's probably not a day when I don't think about it, but there's days where the impact and the work of it, the mission of it is so much more prominent in my mind that it's surreal. Because when I'm at home and I'm, emptying the litter box or getting my kids set up for online school or whatever, I don't think of that important work.
Yeah.
And yet it still goes on beyond me. So when I do pause and I think about it, I'm like, is that me?
Yeah, I bet that is kind of surreal.
Wild.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's very surreal. And I have to say, I really need to acknowledge that I am Julia's weekend mom. I get to go in and I get to advocate for her. I get to play on screen with other Muppeteers.
Yeah.
And the people doing the really heavy lifting are the writers and the researchers. They are Julia's weekday mom. They are Julia's weekday parents, moms and dads. They are working so hard to get this right.
I have no doubt.
It is really, and that in and of itself is humbling to see. I found out about Julia when the rest of the world did, when she was introduced in the books,
right,
in the online content. And I remember just being absolutely floored by it and feeling so grateful, even though my child wasn't the Sesame Street target age anymore. He was in junior high by then.
Yeah.
But seeing that 5 years ago was just incredible. And also bringing it back to Jim Henson, knowing that none of this would be happening without Jim's work, without Jim doing the heavy lifting and the heavy playing and the recruiting and the dreaming and the creating and the imagining.
What is it? Life's like a movie, write your own ending, keep believing, keep pretending.
Yes. Yes. When I moved into my art studio 5.5 years ago, or almost 5.5 years ago, I found a little picture frame that had just kind of been thrown in a box of stuff. And I think it was stuff that somebody had given me, like, I don't know if you can use this. And I was like, oh, that's kind of puppet-sized frame, maybe. And I shoved it in a box. And when I was putting things in the new studio, moving it from my very cramped home, I found this little purple frame, and I decided to get a piece of paper. And my studio was practically empty, by the way. So it's like two things that I had out. Was a little bird feeder that looked like a sewing machine this is so happy. and then this little frame, and I wrote the word play.
Nice.
Because that's what I wanted to do in that space. That's what I grew up wanting to do when I grew up, was I wanted to play. And that becoming the thing that Julia says, I mean, it was almost like kismet, you know. It was just this, I get this kid. This kid wants to play.
Yeah.
I get this kid. This kid wants to make art and play.
Yeah. Well, I like to play, but I'm not very good at art. I'm glad some people are, and I'm glad she is.
You know what?
I say art. Art's a lot of things. There's certain types of art, I guess I should say.
I bet you are good at art. You're good at the art of podcasting.
Oh, I appreciate it.
That's a challenge. It's a challenge, you know.
It is, but podcasting also affords me an opportunity to be able to have really great conversations like this. And when it's a great conversation like this, it's much more about you than it is me. And I am so glad we got a chance to talk as much as we have about your life and your opportunity and the impact it's had. And then also a love of nerd culture and Jim Henson and Sesame Street. I mean, we've covered a lot of awesome ground today, and I'm so grateful for that. And I definitely want people to, if they haven't had a chance to see Julia for whatever reason, we're going to have some video on the show notes for this episode. I'm also going to link your website. I think you made reference to it just a second ago, called Puppet Pie. Do you want to real quickly tell people what Puppet Pie is?
Oh, yes, absolutely. So Puppet Pie is an art studio downtown in Phoenix, Arizona, where I teach people how to create puppets, how to make art, even if they think that they can't. I've done plenty of corporate workshops where somebody has started and kind of hemmed and hawed, and why did they have to participate, and then ended with, look, I made a hat out of a pipe cleaner and half a ping pong ball. And it's like, that's great.
That's awesome.
So I think this is where I love helping people unlock playing. And when you play, you make great art regardless.
Agreed.
Regardless of what you're doing. Yeah. So that's my space where I do that. I've got programming for kids. I also make puppets. So you can find some of the things on puppetery.com. I've kind of switched over to making masks to help not only pay the bills, but help mask my community during the COVIDian era. And then I just bought an ice cream truck.
I saw that.
So to convert it to a mobile puppet studio. So the original idea was to have a puppet food truck where I sold food that looked like you'd buy from I sold puppets that looked like food you'd buy from a food truck. And part of that was I only get one shot at this.
Yeah.
I only get to live this life once.
That's right.
And at least in my belief system, I only get to do this once as me. And I don't want to look back and wish that I had bought a puppet food truck.
That makes sense to me.
some people get convertibles for their midlife crises. I get a ice cream truck. So I'm in the process of fixing that up, and I'm hoping to launch it sometime between November and January. My fingers are crossed.
We'll keep an eye on it.
Yeah. I'm really looking forward to it, and I'm going to call it. One of my friends just came up with this. I'm going to call it Puppet Pie a la mobile.
A la mobile.
So
okay.
Yeah, so it's like cool. A la mode. But yep, and I just redid my logo for the truck, and it's got a little puppet pie, a little puppet that looks like pie.
I see it.
And then I'm putting a couple of ice cream scoops next to it, little ice cream friends. So
awesome. That's so neat.
This is my attempt to bring some normalcy to the COVID era and to bring some fun to the era that comes after.
Well, I know it's very much appreciated by everybody in your community. And I know there's a lot of people out there that have had an opportunity to watch Julia on Sesame Street and learn more about your story. And that's made a huge impact too. So just as someone who believes in everything that's happening there, thank you for everything that you're doing and all the creativity and passion you put into it. And thank you so much for taking time out of everything that you're doing to come and talk to me about it today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much. And giving Julia to a bigger audience. It's really important. So thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you for honoring Jim Henson.
Oh, well, my pleasure. I do it every chance I can. I mean, it doesn't have to be in a podcast. Anytime I'm wearing a shirt, anytime I'm, showing somebody the Funko Pop I have of him holding Kermit,
Yes.
any chance I get to talk to somebody, I try to, anytime I'm doing something creative, because I'm very right-brained, very creative, and I do tie that to not only Sesame Street and some of the things that I saw there, but definitely the impact that he had on my life. And it's just very, it means a lot to me knowing how hard that day was when we lost him, to still be able to see all the new people over the years that have been able to continue so much of what he was a part of. So it's my honor to do that whenever I can, and it's great to talk to people who are part of carrying that forward.
Oh, thank you.